Hello, and welcome to Noel's Good Friends Show. I'm your host, Noel. It's a show where I invite my friends to talk about our friendship, how to meet new people, and how to be a good friend. Today's guest is a talented animator and illustrator, a t-shirt designer of some of the worst t-shirts you've ever seen in your life, former neighbor, and a very, very good friend. Please welcome Olivia. Hey, Olivia, welcome to the show.
Hello. How's it going?
For context, the t-shirts are like they're ironically bad.
Yeah, they're intentionally the worst shirts you've ever
Yes,
seen.
we meant for
I'll
them
let
to be
you
that
try
way.
it, actually.
Today's episode is called Hey Neighbor, and it's inspired by how Olivia and I came to be friends. We used to live in the same building, and it's one of those multi-family units here in New York City where the landlady lives in the building. In total, it was just me, Olivia, the landlady, and her son. So by default, we became a pretty tight-knit community. So, Olivia, what were your first impressions from our meeting?
When we first met, I was not expecting to get a new neighbor. I had pretty much never talked to the other people that had lived in your apartment previously, but like our landlady came up and knocked on my door and she's like, "Oh, this is your new neighbor." And you were like, "Are you a designer?" And I was just like so thrown off by that. And I was like, "Wait, are you a designer?"
Olivia had a bunch of these posters in the back. It was so colorful. It was clearly somebody who had, some involvement in the design community.
Interaction just like made me excited. I was like, "Oh, someone my age, someone who's into design, like what luck." I don't know. I was excited.
That day that we met, that was when I picked up my keys to move in. And so like maybe a week or so later, I moved in. It was a pretty a slow start. I mean, I think the earliest memories that I have when I finally moved into the building is I think I was like I left my door open and I was building this like orange kind of metal cabinet that I have. What are some of the more memorable moments from us living in the same building? Whether that's at the beginning of it or as it went on.
Definitely like we had like little Sex in the City nights or just like TV movie nights, and that was so fun because I could just come over in my pajamas and like literally our doors were like right next to each other, so it felt like I was just coming out of my bedroom to come say hi. So it really felt like you were my roommate, which is something you said before too.
Yeah, I mean, like I have lived by myself for about 4 years at the time I moved in. I'm used to kind of living alone and, in like big buildings where people are pretty disconnected. That kind of proximity, created the foundations for us to keep interacting with one another. So, what was your relationship with your neighbors growing up?
So I grew up in like suburban Tennessee, like kind of outside of Nashville, and it was very spread out. You could only get places by car. My parents lived probably 3 miles away from like a grocery store or anything, so that nothing was walkable. You couldn't like walk anywhere. And they lived in a neighborhood where they lived mostly around like older people. So I didn't really have like a lot of neighbor friends like that I would go hang out with, but they did have um one next door neighbor that had like a kid that was kind of my age, and we would always kind of get forced lumped together because my parents were around their age too. Like we actually went to like prom together. Like we did we did like a lot of stuff together. Um but I think that was more of like my parents doing and my parents trying to find community versus me.
Right. I mean, part of it is about like opportunity, right? So, like, I grew up in the Philippines where we lived in the subdivision where the houses are pretty close to each other. And there was like a huge community of neighbors of like my aunts and uncles as friends and their kids who then became my friends. It was lovely in that way, you know what I mean? Because you did have like people that, you kind of grew up with, but as we got older, we kind of like went our separate ways. Do you think the nature of that time allowed for people to connect more than then than now? And what do you think could have contributed to that?
Yeah, when my parents moved into that house and stuff, there were the people around them were their main connections and their main community. The parents of the kids that I was going to school with were like their main friends. So proximity, I think, was very important to them, and that influenced like who I was hanging out with too, because my parents were like, "Oh, well, it would be great if our kids were friends. We could hang out." So I think now it might be a little different. My roommates are both like nannies, and they were telling me about this space in Williamsburg. I think it's literally called like Space Club, and they take these kids there. It's almost like millennial, like modern Chuck E. Cheese. Like page, and they have like this whole wall of like like deconstructed stuffed bunny rabbits that are all pink. And it's this place where like parents take their kids to go like play together and stuff, but it's also very parent oriented. Like I think there's like bay in there and stuff. So it's, I don't know, these ideas of these spaces are like evolving. Like when I was a kid, that was like YMCA or something. But now it's like this very like crafted, like super specific parent interests kind of.
That's really interesting. For two reasons. Like one is that so much of like your experience as a kid is really informed by like what your parents put you up to. And so that the curation of their interests translated into your experience, for better or for worse, you know? And the other is that I'm tickled by the idea of this like mid-century modern
Literally.
animatronic mouse. Because there's like Chuck E. Cheese, but just made like really like, you know, kind of design forward.
Or like, how can we do Chuck E. Cheese like without the gambling?
Right. Right. I never thought of Chuck E. Cheese as a childhood gambling ring, but we need a study on how many people did really well at Chuck E. Cheese and are now into sports betting. Before we became friends, how did you approach relationships with neighbors?
I think I've always, especially in New York, all my neighbors were kind of like older. Uh, like the building that I lived in previously to the one that we lived in together. I didn't really know a lot of the neighbors. Floors were kind of sectioned off so that you like the staircase, like you really didn't see people. Kind of similar to the building I'm in now. But the one person that I did get to know really well was my building superintendent who like lived downstairs, and that was he was just kind of like a funny guy. I would always see him around. I remember like one of the first times I saw him, he was like shirtless in our backyard. He had a snake around his neck.
Wait,
An
wait, like an actual snake or like a?
actual snake,
Oh
and he
my
was
god!
just smoking a cigarette. Just died. I was like, okay, his name is Orlando. He was just like super funny. Um, and I like after my breakup with my ex, he came and he was like helping me a lot and was like there was just like one day where he was like asking me about like what happened. He was like, I haven't seen her around anymore. Like, did you guys break up? And I, yeah. and, and so we were like talking about it, and it was like he was way older than me. He was like in his 50s or 60s.
I have this fantasy of like after he heard about your breakup, he was like, "Oh, you carry snake. You put the snake around your neck."
So why you can come chain smoke in the backyard anytime.
I have plenty. This is actually making me think of the relationship of a quirky neighbor. There's this at the building that I lived in, two apartments before the one we lived in together. I lived in like a pre-war building where some of the people have lived there forever. When I'd moved in, I had brought my family's like old TV, not like the big back TV. It was like a flatter screen, but it was heavy. So I thought I wanted to use it, and then I ended up just like leaving it. If you lived in a big building in New York, the foyer is like this magical place where you can just leave things and then they'll disappear. Like any furniture, any TV. And so one day I left the TV, and then I did kind of see the lady like looking at it, but I was like on my way out. So next thing I know, obviously the TV's gone. But a couple of days later, I was coming home from somewhere, and then the lady caught me and she goes, and I was like, the remote. And so she was like looking for the remote of the TV. I was like, I ended up giving her the remote, but I just thought it was funny how she like advocated for herself. I just thought it was quite bold.
Had you ever talked to her like before that?
No. I mean, I believe she was Haitian. So I think she mostly spoke Creole. I think that was also part of the fun of living in that neighborhood is how much me and my neighbors kind of communicated with what limited access to language we have to each other. Do you think living near someone makes it easier to build friendship?
Yeah, I think so. One of the easiest ways to build friendship is that familiarity and repetition of seeing each other. Like, you know that you're going to be in that same space together or whatever. I mean, I think it's like a luck of the draw of who neighbor is. Absolutely. Because, could be a million people that you're incompatible with. Most of my neighbors I haven't been friends with. So I do think that like especially not even just like next door neighbors, just like having friends that live close by, it's so much easier to like maintain that friendship when you're in a space where people are near you.
Yeah, it creates the opportunity for a couple of things. Spontaneity, right? There's this one very specific moment that I had one time where I was like heading out the house and then your cat came out and I forgot their name at the time. And so I was like walking down the staircase and I was like, Olivia, what's your cat's name again? And then there was this like silence. Oh, I guess you didn't hear me. So as I was walking down the stairs, you go, Cinnamon. And then maybe like a couple weeks after, you asked me to cat sit for you. It's those micro interactions that is really valuable. These little opportunities that you kind of get to know somebody before that break into forming a friendship. You know what I mean? But speaking of breaks, we're we're gonna take a quick break, but we'll be back with more Olivia on Noel's good friendship. Welcome back. I'm here with my good friend Olivia. Today we're talking about becoming friends with your neighbors. Going back to you and I's friendship, was there a specific moment when you decided to be intentional about building our friendship?
I think like honestly right off the bat, I was like I said, like super excited to have another designer nearby. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like already plotting in my head. I was like, we can go to the like, makers meets together. Like we can go to like all these local artist events, like if he wants to be my friend. And you had moved in right around the holidays. And I had been like in and out of town. And so I think it was probably like a month after you moved in that I put together like a little care package for you that had like some wine and some candy. And I wrote in a little note that I was like, it's like great to meet you. If you're a designer, like there's some like local events we can totally go together. Here's my number. I was like, I was kind of nervous to give it to you. And I remember I didn't even knock on your door. I just put it outside the door. I was like, out of my hands now.
It was so whimsical. It was like it was very like Harry Potter being left in the doorstep kind of vibe.
Uh-huh.
You know, like I just opened my door again, about to head out somewhere, and then there was this little tiny package right in front of my door, and there's a bottle of wine, and it was the candies. So they were called. I always forget the name.
They were Goo Goo clusters because I had just gone to my family in Tennessee, and Goo Goo clusters is like the big candy, like
Yeah.
exclusive to Tennessee or whatever.
Yeah, they were delicious. Yeah, and then there was this handwritten note where you talked about welcome to the building, da 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 da. Then you left your number, and that's when I texted back. So nice to meet you. You know, glad that we are connected and whatnot. I just appreciated that gesture. I don't think it was overly eager or anything at all. But you know, it has a lot to do with I was equally interested in being your friend. You know what I mean? It comes down to like that mutuality to it. And you know, I think it was extremely vulnerable for you to kind of extend yourself in that way, but I'm so grateful. You know, we made it this far.
I know.
So what do you think is the difference between being neighborly and being a genuine friend?
I think like with what we were talking before with like my previous stuff with my neighbors, I think a lot of that relationship felt very communal and like very like, you know, I would do something for them or whatever and they could help me with things, but it wasn't necessarily like we would hang out outside of the
Yeah.
building or like we didn't really know too much about each other's lives and that kind of thing. Like it was more of like a benefit of if you need something, I'm here. Um, our friendship obviously like transcended that boundary, but I like even extending that gift to you, I was like, you know what? Worst case, we have like that really good community bond where we can like look out for each other. It's a small building. It was, you know, it's like it's nice to know the people around you either way. So
Right.
yeah.
I actually want to go as far to say like there's nothing wrong with just being neighborly too. You know what I mean? I think especially if you live in a building, it's really nice to have somebody like if you like lock yourself out, which you inevitably will. But I think just having these, you know, a community of like these loose, friendly ties is what makes up a life. You know what I mean? Was there a moment when our friendship shifted from being neighborly to being deeper? Is there a specific moment that you could feel like, okay, this is a moment?
I think well, we had hung out before, but I think the first time we maybe hung out one-on-one was on Valentine's Day.
Yeah, so we spent Valentine's Day
Yeah, we did some Valentine's Day together. We had Galentine's Day. And that was about like a month and a half after we had kind of like met and I had sent you the little note and been like, please be my friend. And I think that was the first time we like really opened up about stuff that was more than just like friendly talk, like work talk. Cause we had gone to like like a creatives meetup
Yeah.
together, like I had suggested in the note.
Hmm.
And we had talked a lot about like work, like friend stuff. I'd met some of your coworkers, but that was like Valentine's Day was the first time it was like, all right, how are things really, you know?
Right, right, right. And I think it's, to that end, right, we have talked about, creative stuff and work stuff, and I think we were both kind of talking to somebody at the time too. But the fact that we chose to spend Valentine's Day with each other, I think was indicative of where we were with with our respective partners. But also, I don't know, I was so vulnerable. And I find myself in these moments all the time where like I find when I'm in a really kind of tough spot where um I guess when I'm in need of something, like a friend kind of shows up by some magical force, and I'm grateful for that. But yeah, I think it definitely shifted the bounds of like what we could talk about, and I think it's extended our conversations, what we want out of life, and especially in like this kind of relational perspective. So,
Yeah.
oh, what consistent actions or habits do you think help maintain our connection?
I really like our little
Yeah,
brunches.
I was gonna say Zatar.
Or, um, yeah, I think that's so cute. I've never had like a friend that I brunch with, and I just like I love our brunches. We always come up and like there'll always be something that we say and be like, oh my god, what a Sex in the City moment.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, where I think that's just like it's a fun way of just like chatting, catching up. It's during the day. I feel like it's like so hard to schedule like nighttime things. So have like consistent activity that we do is nice.
yeah, exactly. Like, and I think that is so important in any kind of friendship, like finding like your thing with somebody, like your way of like maintaining that connection. Like for some people, it's like I know, like with a bunch of my friends, especially who don't live in the city, like it's FaceTimes, but like for us to have these brunches you know, and what I love about it is like I'm getting like a TV show, like I'm getting updates on stories that you had told me. It's almost like when I would see you like previously in Olivia's life, and then I'd get like the update of that week. And yeah, I think something kind of consistent really helped like deepen that friendship. And also the things that we did after, there was a time where we went to brunch and you helped me pick up like an AC unit and stuff like that. There's always like the side quests after. Um, we're gonna take another break, but there will be more Noel's Good Friend Show when we come back. Hello, and welcome back to Noel's Good Friend Show. I'm here with my good friend Olivia. Today we're talking about neighbors, but I actually wanted to expand this conversation. I think our lives have become a little more segmented, largely because of our phones. But I'm curious if we could also invest in thinking of it towards connection, something like a digital neighborhood. So, Olivia, what are some of the ways you've seen or experienced social media bringing people together the way neighbors would?
I guess like, you're what we kind of talked about with like familiarity is you're seeing these people over and over again. You're getting to know them by the way they post on these kind of passive ways. Can become less passive if you want to like engage or comment or like their story or comment on their story or send a message or something like that. But you're kind of in this space together, having these very passive interactions. But I do think the difference is that you are intentionally choosing to be in that space with the person versus like, neighbor is kind of luck of the draw, like who you're around.
Right, right. And I think some of the value of social media as this concept of digital neighborhood is, you know, one of the things that we were talking about was the value of having a neighbor is the opportunity for spontaneous interaction, right? Like this idea of like I didn't intend to interact with you today, but because I ran into you in the hallway or like down the street or in a laundromat or something like that. I think it's on us to, be intentional about like reacting. So maybe swiping up on somebody's story and just saying a little something. And I think some of those same principles apply where like you have these little interactions and it does not guarantee that like a deeper connection will be born out of it, but it does create the opportunity for it to be. So for this, for example, somebody you meet entirely through social media, you just follow each other because you like each other's pictures or your work, especially as artists. You can comment on each other's things here and there. And I cannot tell you how many times it's happened where, especially as a queer person, these people who I've interacted with on social media, and then I would run into them at Pride, and it would be the opportunity, like, oh my God, I know you. You know what I mean? And maybe we'll become friends out of that, maybe not. But again, we can't sleep on its opportunity to kind of break some of those kind of boundaries into forming a connection. What do you think it takes to create a digital neighborhood, a sense of community and support in an online space? Are there practices or platforms that work better than others?
I think every platform kind of has its own culture. I always think it's interesting, like when you're talking to people in real life, to see like what platforms they kind of gravitate towards, because I feel like that almost says a lot about a person. Like if someone, I'm on Twitter all the time, or like I'm on Reddit all the time, I'm like those are two very different people.
Yeah. Nightmare blunt rotation.
So I feel like it's, it's almost choosing the city, the social media platform, and then you choose the neighborhood and kind of like the niche that you develop there, I guess, like the people you're interacting with.
I think like the platform is really indicative of like what things you can talk about, right? You know what I mean? Like, and it is interesting the way and this might, go into a completely different conversation, but like also the version of the person that you're getting based on the platform. I've always found that fascinating. You know what I mean? Like, because people on Twitter, especially gay men on Twitter, they get really salacious on Twitter in ways that they're so polished and so professional on, like, say, Instagram or something.
Yeah.
I think there's also
true of me. Like my Instagram is basically like a second portfolio, but on Twitter, like shit posting. Yeah.
What are the ways that we can cultivate the sense of community even through a digital platform?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of social media is like still based on one-on-one interactions. Like I don't know, like Twitter and stuff has tried to do like the group space thing where like everyone chats or whatever, but I feel like a lot of it does foster one-on-one connections in a way that is more intimate than like if you just met someone in real, like at a bar or something.
Yeah.
A lot of the ways that that social media has kind of fostered community for me in terms of like getting more individual friends from it is that like I'll meet someone like or something, and then when we're about to go, I'll be like, oh, can I get your Instagram? Like it'll be like a friend of a friend at a party. And then like see more of them and you're like, man, I really liked this person and I really liked them when I met them in real life. Maybe I'll reach out more, or like maybe I'll start responding more to their stories, and then you kind of warm up to each other in this way that's more expedited than like if you kept seeing this person like around your friend or something like that. Like it kind of speeds up the process of familiarity a little bit.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and that seems to be like the recurring theme, right? If we could break it down, I think some of the tenets of building a friendship is familiarity and intentionality, right? The idea of like slowly getting to know a person and being familiar with them, and then shifting to intentionality. And that has to be mutual, right? Like you will want to pursue a friendship with this person, but they also have to want to pursue a friendship with you, and you can feel that. I like that idea of like, when you meet somebody in person, you get their Instagram, and, maybe you met them at like a party, like you said, it expedites the opportunity of building that relationship instead of like waiting until you run into them. If you run into them again, you're able to kind of continue to foster that friendship within like a digital platform. And I think that's dope. What are some digital boundaries that we should set to maintain healthy relationships in our online communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes, it can get a little bit parasocial where like you'll kind of imprint these beliefs on me that you think I might have or something like that. Like it doesn't happen to me very often, but I think sometimes, especially being a woman, you get some solicitation from
I couldn't even imagine. I do not envy like like a pretty woman's DMs. I feel like there's some like frightening things happening in there.
Sometimes you'll just like post a picture where you're like looking cute, and someone that you met like one time that like follows you and likes your stories will like finally send a risky DM. I don't know, you like that, but people will think that they do. So I don't know. You're putting yourself out there, and sometimes that can be a good thing. Sometimes that can lead to close connections, and sometimes that can expedite how the people that you don't want to get to know as well.
Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, well, I mean, for what it's worth, at least like there's enough of a separation in a digital media platform that you can just,
You just ignore it. Yeah.
ignore it, or,
Wait, oh no,
but
thanks.
I really do like keeping the idea of a parasocial relationship in mind, where you can sometimes assume too much how close you are to somebody based on how you interact on the internet, but that really can't be confirmed until you have these interactions in person. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think a little bit of a balance of, you know, IRL and URL interactions.
Yes. I do think that like there is something to be said, especially as like artists putting our work out there. There is beneficiality to making people kind of want to parasocially interact with you. Like they like I mean, you're putting out work that's like somewhat personal sometimes, and people feel like they can connect to that. Like it can be like a good thing.
Something that helps guide me when in my interactions on social media is to assume that it is a performance, because it always is. Even when people think that like I'm just being myself, like there is a conscious effort in like taking the camera, pointing it towards yourself, and portraying yourself in a certain way that is never neutral. You know what I mean? It's not this like roving CCTV camera that like watches at all times. There is an intentionality about how you present yourself, and that's true for everyone. And so like the version of a person that you're seeing is the version of themselves that they want you to see. And that's not always reflective about who they actually are, for better and for worse.
I think that's true too of like how you interact with social media, whether it's you're posting a lot or you're posting not at all. That says like people are going to have an impression of that. Even if you're posting nothing, you're saying something by posting.
Totally. And it's like, you know what? I'm going to take this a step further. There's, I think, a previous mindset I have that I would have had, oh, how disgusting. I hate being perceived or whatever. But I don't think being perceived was like exclusive to the digital age. It feels so much more severe because it's now globalized and so intense and so easy and so permanent sometimes, your digital footprint. But, the risk of being perceived was always there. It's like one of the things that come with existing. So that's almost all the time we have for today. Although I think this conversation around friendship and the internet leaves a lot to be explored. We might even dedicate an entire episode to it. But before we go, I have one more question. Olivia, if we hadn't been neighbors, do you think we'd still have become friends? Why or why not?
I should think so. I think we have like an energy that's very compatible with each other. But I think, the luck of just like where we were.
Totally. Yeah.
I think it can be so hard to meet people. And I don't know if we would have been in a similar like physical space, like not met in the building, because, we go to different things.
That's exactly how I feel, because it's like we clearly have such a sense of, compatibility and like, our sense of humor, our interests and all these things. But yeah, I couldn't, if not for having moved into the same building, I don't know how we would have run into each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, and maybe, if we could break down some of those tenets. So there's familiarity, there's intentionality, but we cannot underestimate the value of kismet, of luck, of like things kind of falling into place. And, all things considered, I feel very, very lucky that we met.
Me too.
So thank you for joining me today, Olivia. It's so good having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And to you at home, I'm Noel, and this is Noel's Good Friend Show. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and thank you for being a good friend. Till next time.